Her ex said, "You can't run from me anymore." Hell's Angel was watching in the park. The morning sun filtered through the maple trees, casting dappled shadows on the worn wooden bench where Diana sat. Her fingers curled around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the crisp autumn air, creating a moment of perfect contentment. Her small terrier, Max, bounded across the grass, chasing leaves that danced in the gentle breeze. Diana smiled, watching him play with unbridled joy. It had taken her 3 years after the divorce to finally get a pet. James had never allowed animals in the house. Now, Max was her constant companion, a source of unconditional love she hadn't known she needed. The park was quiet at this hour, just the way she liked it. A few early morning joggers passed by, nodding hello. An elderly couple walked hand in hand along the path, and Diana felt a small twinge in her heart. Not of jealousy exactly, but of wonder at what it might be like to grow old with someone who truly loved you. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. She took another sip of her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest. These morning rituals had become sacred to her over the past few years. Simple pleasures that James could no longer take away. The bench, the coffee, the dog, the peace. They were all hers. Diana closed her eyes for a moment, tilting her face toward the sun. 5 years of freedom had taught her to appreciate these quiet moments. The park had become her sanctuary, a place where memories of screaming matches and slammed doors couldn't reach her. The morning air felt clean in her lungs, washing away the remnants of old fears. Max trotted back to her, his tail wagging as he dropped a stick at her feet. "Good boy," she murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. His fur was soft under her fingers, and his loving brown eyes looked up at her with complete trust. She picked up the stick and tossed it, watching him dash after it with enthusiasm. The leaves rustled overhead, and a robin landed on the path nearby, pecking at something in the grass. Diana checked her watch. She still had plenty of time before she needed to head to work at the library. These precious morning moments were hers to savor. She reached into her bag and pulled out the novel she'd been reading, a gentle romance about second chances. The pages were worn from multiple readings, but she didn't mind. There was something comforting about returning to a story where love was kind and patient, where happy endings weren't just possible, but guaranteed. "Diana!" The harsh voice sliced through her peaceful morning like a knife. Her hands trembled, causing coffee to slosh over the rim of her cup. She knew that voice, would always know that voice. Max stopped playing and growled, his hackles rising as James stormed across the grass, toward her. His face was red with anger, his movements jerky and aggressive. Even from a distance, Diana could smell the alcohol on him. "You think you can just ignore my calls?" James shouted, causing nearby birds to scatter. "Who do you think you are?" Diana's throat tightened, her heart hammering against her ribs. The coffee cup shook in her hands as that familiar anxiety crept up her spine. The feeling she thought she'd finally left behind. The morning's peace shattered like glass, leaving her exposed and vulnerable on her favorite bench in her favorite park. Diana's peaceful morning shattered as James towered over her, his face red with rage. The stench of alcohol rolled off him in waves, making her stomach turn. Several park visitors stopped to stare at the unfolding scene. "You think you can just walk away from me?" James's words slurred together as he jabbed a finger toward her face. "After everything I gave you, 30 years of marriage, and this is how you repay me?" Diana's hands trembled around her coffee cup. She set it down carefully on the bench beside her, not wanting to give away how badly she was shaking. Max growled at James, his small body tensing as he positioned himself between them. "James, please, you're making a scene." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, but inside her heart hammered against her ribs. 5 years of freedom, and still, his presence made her feel small again. "Making a scene?" He let out a harsh laugh that echoed across the park. "You want to see a scene? I'll show you a scene." He kicked at the ground, sending dirt flying toward Max, who yelped and jumped back. "Leave him alone!" Diana stood up, anger momentarily overriding her fear. "You're drunk, James. Go home." "Don't tell me what to do." His voice boomed louder, causing several people to pull out their phones. "You're still my wife. You'll always be my wife." "We've been divorced for 5 years," Diana said, trying to keep her voice level. "Please, just go." James's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think those papers mean anything? You belong to me." He stepped closer, his breath hot on her face. "No one else will ever want you. You're nothing without me." Diana felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the panic rising like a tide. The world seemed to shrink around her, just like it used to during their marriage. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stay standing. "I said, you're coming with me." James's fingers wrapped around her arm, his grip painfully tight. Diana winced as he started pulling her toward the parking lot. Max barked frantically, but James simply kicked out at him again. That's when a shadow fell across them both. Diana looked up to see a massive figure standing nearby, a man in a leather jacket, his arms covered in tattoos. His presence commanded attention, but it was his eyes that caught Diana's attention. They were filled with a quiet understanding. "Let her go." The man's voice was low and steady, like distant thunder. James's grip tightened on Diana's arm. "Mind your own business, buddy. This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," the man corrected calmly. He took a step forward, and despite his size, there was something graceful about his movement. "You can't run from me anymore." Those words seemed to hit James like a physical blow. His fingers loosened on Diana's arm as he took in the stranger's appearance, the well-worn leather jacket, the club tattoos, the way he carried himself. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crept into James's expression. The two men locked eyes, and Diana felt the shift in the air. James's bravado wavered as he looked up at the tattooed stranger. His hand fell away from Diana's arm completely, leaving angry red marks on her skin. Graham planted himself between Diana and James, his broad shoulders blocking James from view. Despite his imposing presence, Graham's stance remained calm and controlled. His weathered leather jacket creaked as he crossed his tattooed arms, revealing glimpses of faded ink that told stories of a rough past. "Step aside," James snarled, his bloodshot eyes darting between Graham and Diana. "This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," Graham corrected, his voice low and steady. "And from what I can see, the lady doesn't want to talk to you." Diana stood behind Graham, her arms wrapped around herself. Max pressed against her legs, offering silent comfort. She watched as James's face twisted with familiar rage, the same expression she'd seen countless times during their marriage. "You don't know who you're dealing with," James spat, taking a step forward. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dangerous sway in his stance. Graham didn't move an inch. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with." His words carried the weight of experience. "Men like you, they only feel strong when they're making others feel weak." A small crowd had gathered at a safe distance, their morning walks forgotten as they watched the confrontation unfold. A young mother hurriedly steered her children toward another path. The tension in the air felt thick enough to cut. James's fingers curled into fists. "You think you're some kind of hero?" He let out a bitter laugh. "Look at you, nothing but a washed-up biker playing protector. Better than a drunk trying to intimidate his ex-wife in a public park." Graham's calm demeanor seemed to infuriate James even more. Diana watched James's face turn an even darker shade of red. She recognized the signs, the twitching muscle in his jaw, the way his right hand kept clenching and unclenching. In their marriage, these were always warnings of an impending storm. James took another step forward, nearly nose to nose with Graham now. "You're making a big mistake," he hissed through clenched teeth. Graham didn't flinch. He stood like a mountain, unmoved by James's threats. The morning sun caught the silver in his beard as he spoke again. "The only mistake here is yours. Walk away while you still can." Something in Graham's quiet confidence seemed to penetrate James's alcohol-fueled bravado. His eyes darted around, taking in the watching crowd, the jogger who had stopped to make a phone call, the park security guard approaching in the distance. "This isn't over," James muttered, jabbing a finger in Diana's direction. "You hear me? This isn't over." He took a few unsteady steps backward, his expensive shoes scuffing against the park's gravel path. With a final glare that made Diana's blood run cold, James turned and stormed off, shouldering past an elderly couple who quickly stepped aside. His retreating form grew smaller as he disappeared down the tree-lined path. Graham turned to face Diana, his stern expression softening into a gentle smile. Though his presence was reassuring, Diana couldn't stop her hands from trembling. The confrontation had left her feeling exposed and vulnerable, bringing back memories she'd worked hard to bury. Diana's hands trembled as she clipped Max's leash back on. The morning's peaceful routine had shattered, leaving her rattled and uncertain. Graham stood nearby, his presence like a protective wall between her and the direction James had stormed off in. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to think about that," Graham said softly, his gruff exterior softening. Despite his intimidating appearance, the leather vest, the tattoos that covered his arms, the gray beard, his eyes held a gentleness that made Diana feel unexpectedly safe. They began walking, Max trotting ahead and occasionally glancing back at them. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the pathway. Diana noticed how Graham kept a respectful distance, yet remained close enough to step in if needed. "I live just around the corner," Diana said, gesturing vaguely. "You don't have to walk with us." "I'd feel better making sure you get home safe," Graham replied, his boots scuffed against the pavement as they walked. James might still be around. The mention of his name made Diana's shoulders tense. "He's not supposed to come near me. There's a restraining order." "Paper doesn't stop people like him," Graham said matter-of-factly, "but knowing someone's watching out for you might." Diana studied him from the corner of her eye. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Graham was quiet for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "Let's just say I've seen enough people get hurt. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step up." They reached Diana's apartment building, a modest 3-story structure with window boxes full of geraniums. Max sat patiently as Diana fished her keys from her purse. "I'm at the park most mornings," Graham said, taking a step back. "Same bench, reading my paper. If you ever need anything," he left the offer hanging in the air. Diana nodded, uncertainty mixing with gratitude in her chest. "I appreciate what you did back there. She paused, searching for words. "I'm not used to people helping without wanting something in return." A flash of understanding crossed Graham's face. "We all need help sometimes, ma'am. No strings attached." Diana gave him a small smile and headed inside, Max padding along beside her. She climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, her legs feeling heavier with each step. The events of the morning seemed to crash over her all at once. Inside her apartment, she unclipped Max's leash and watched him trot to his water bowl. The familiar space felt different somehow, both a sanctuary and a reminder of how quickly her peace could be disrupted. She sank onto her worn but comfortable couch, running her hands over her face. Her fingers traced the edge of her jaw, where a faint scar served as a permanent reminder of James's temper. The memory of this morning's confrontation mixed with older, darker ones. Yet something felt different this time. The image of Graham standing there, calm and steady, had shown her that maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Diana let out a long sigh, her body finally beginning to release some of its tension. Max came over and rested his head on her knee, his warm brown eyes full of devotion. She scratched behind his ears, grateful for his constant, loving presence. Diana sat in her living room, the morning sunlight streaming through her curtains. Max curled up at her feet, his gentle snoring a comfort in the quiet apartment. Her coffee had gone cold, forgotten on the side table as her mind wandered back through the years. She remembered the early days with James before the darkness crept in. He'd been charming then, always ready with a joke or a compliment. But slowly, so slowly she hardly noticed at first, things changed. A criticism here, a harsh word there. The way he'd grip her arm just a little too tight when they were in public, his fingers leaving marks that she'd hide under long sleeves. "You're nothing without me," he used to say, his voice low and threatening. "Who else would want you?" Diana's hand shook as she reached for her cold coffee. She took a sip anyway, needing something to ground her in the present. The bitter liquid helped push back the memories, but they kept coming. There was the time he'd thrown her favorite ceramic vase against the wall, just inches from her head. He'd apologized the next day, bought her flowers, promised it would never happen again. But it always did happen again. The promises were as hollow as the look in his eyes when he made them. Max stirred at her feet, sensing her distress. He raised his head and placed it on her knee, his brown eyes full of unconditional love. Diana scratched behind his ears, grateful for his presence. The shelter had called him a senior dog with special needs, but to her, he was perfect. Another survivor who understood what it meant to be afraid. She thought about all the times she'd packed a bag, hidden it in the back of her closet, planning to leave. But something always held her back. Fear, mostly. Fear of what James would do if he found her. Fear of being alone. Fear of failing. What will people think? She'd asked herself countless times, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, covering another bruise with makeup. The shame had been overwhelming, like a heavy blanket that threatened to suffocate her. The divorce 5 years ago had been her breaking point. James had pushed her down the stairs during another one of his drunken rages. She'd laid there, pain shooting through her body, and something inside her finally snapped. Not her bones, though she'd had 2 fractured ribs, but her fear. In that moment she realized she was more afraid of staying than leaving. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, startling her from her memories. Max lifted his head, alert. Diana reached for the device, expecting a message from work, or maybe even that kind stranger Graham. The number was unknown, but the message made her blood run cold. "You think that biker can protect you? You're still mine, Diana. Always will be." Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. The familiar fear crept up her spine, making her shoulders tense. Max whined softly, pressing closer to her leg. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the same way it used to when she'd hear James's key in the door after he'd been drinking. The morning's peace shattered completely as she stared at the threatening words on her screen, the black text a stark contrast against the white background. 5 years of building a new life, and with one message, James had found a way back in. Diana jumped at the sound of her phone buzzing. These days, every unexpected noise made her heart race. She picked up the device carefully, relief washing over her when she saw it wasn't James. "Hi, Diana, it's Graham from the park. Just wanted to check if you're doing okay." She stared at the message, surprised by the simple kindness in those words. After a moment's hesitation, her fingers moved across the screen to reply, "I'm okay. Thank you for asking." The response came quickly. "Would you like to grab coffee? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." Diana's chest tightened. Max, sensing her anxiety, pressed his warm body against her legs. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his presence. "What did you want to talk about?" she typed. "There's a support group I think might help. No pressure, just thought we could discuss it over coffee. The Little Bean Cafe on Oak Street?" Diana paced her living room, Max following at her heels. The thought of leaving her apartment made her nervous. What if James was watching? But something about Graham's gentle persistence gave her courage. "Okay," she replied. "Tomorrow at 10? "Perfect. See you then." The next morning, Diana chose her usual table at the Little Bean, the one in the corner with a clear view of both exits. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, ordering a vanilla latte that she now cupped between her hands for warmth. Graham arrived right on time, his large frame somehow less intimidating in the morning light. He'd traded his leather jacket for a plain blue button-down shirt, though his tattoos still peeked out from under the rolled-up sleeves. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from her. His voice was quiet, gentle, nothing like what you'd expect from someone with his tough exterior. "I wasn't sure I would," Diana admitted. Graham nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I run a support group," he said, wrapping his hands around his black coffee. "It's for people who've been through tough times, all kinds of tough times." Diana watched him carefully. "And you think I should join?" "I think it might help," he said. "It helped me." This caught Diana's attention. "You?" Graham's face softened, and he looked down at his coffee. "I wasn't always the person I am now," he said. "Used to run with a rough crowd. The hellsangels. Did things I'm not proud of." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "Lost my family because of it. My kids haven't spoken to me in years." Diana saw the pain in his eyes, raw and familiar. It was the same pain she saw in her own mirror some mornings. "What changed?" she asked softly. "Hit rock bottom. Then someone reached out, showed me there was another way." He looked up at her. "That's what I'm trying to do now. Pay it forward, I guess." Diana felt something shift inside her. The man sitting across from her wasn't the intimidating figure from the park anymore. He was just someone who understood what it meant to be broken and was trying to put himself back together. "The group meets twice a week," Graham continued. "No pressure to share until you're ready. Sometimes just listening helps." Diana's hands trembled as she stood outside the community center. The brick building looked welcoming enough, with warm light spilling from its windows into the early evening darkness. Still, her feet felt heavy as lead. Max wasn't with her this time. No furry comfort to lean on. She checked her phone. 6:58 p.m. The meeting would start in 2 minutes. Diana took a deep breath, remembering Graham's gentle encouragement over coffee last week. "Just come once," he'd said. "If it's not for you, no one will pressure you to return." Inside, the hallway smelled of coffee and cookies. Following the signs, she made her way to room 104. Through the door's window, she could see about 15 people arranged in a circle of chairs. Some chatted quietly, while others sat lost in thought. Graham's tall frame was easy to spot. He was setting up a coffee station in the corner. Diana's hand hovered over the door handle. Part of her wanted to turn around and run, but then Graham looked up and caught her eye. His warm smile and small nod gave her the courage to push the door open. "Welcome," a woman with silver hair said, approaching Diana. "I'm Margaret. First time here?" Diana nodded, her throat too tight for words. "Come on in," Margaret said. "We're just getting started. Grab some coffee if you'd like." Graham walked over, 2 cups in hand. "Thought you might want this," he said, offering her one. 2 sugars, right?" The fact that he remembered how she took her coffee from their cafe meeting touched her. Diana accepted the cup with a grateful smile. She chose a seat between Margaret and an elderly man who introduced himself as Frank. The circle felt both intimate and overwhelming. As people settled in, Graham took his place across from her. "Let's begin," Margaret said. "For our newcomers, this is a safe space. Whatever's shared here stays here. No one is required to speak. Listening is just as valuable as sharing." The next 40 minutes passed in a blur of stories. Diana listened as people spoke about abuse, loss, addiction, and healing. Their honesty stunned her. There was no judgment, only understanding nods and supportive words. When Margaret asked if anyone else would like to share, Diana surprised herself by raising her hand. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. I was married for 32 years, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but behind closed doors, she paused, taking a shaky breath. Graham caught her eye and nodded encouragingly. Behind closed doors, I disappeared bit by bit. He took everything, my confidence, my friends, my sense of self. Even after the divorce, he wouldn't let go. But recently, she glanced at Graham. Someone showed me that I'm not alone, that I don't have to keep carrying this by myself. Tears slid down her cheeks, but for the first time in years, they weren't tears of fear or shame. They were tears of relief. As she finished speaking, the room remained quietly supportive. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. "Thank you for sharing, Diana," Margaret said softly. "It takes immense courage to speak your truth." Several others murmured words of support and understanding. Looking around the circle, Diana saw no pity in their eyes, only recognition and empathy. These people understood. They'd been there too, in their own ways. As the meeting wrapped up, Diana felt lighter somehow. The weight she'd carried for so long hadn't disappeared, but it felt more manageable now that it was shared. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the park's worn walking paths. Diana sat on her usual bench, watching Max chase a butterfly through the grass. Her coffee was still warm, and the morning held that special kind of quiet she'd grown to treasure, just bird songs and distant traffic. The support group meeting from earlier that week had left her feeling stronger. Sharing her story had cracked open something inside her, letting in small rays of hope. She took a long sip of coffee, savoring the warmth and peace of the moment. Max suddenly stopped playing, his ears perking up. Diana followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. There, partially hidden behind a large oak tree about 50 yards away, stood James. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. His presence alone was enough to make the morning air feel thick and heavy. Diana's hands began to shake, causing ripples in her coffee. She tried to steady her breathing, the way Margaret from the support group had taught her. "In through the nose, out through the mouth," she whispered to herself. But the calm she'd felt moments ago had vanished like morning mist. James took a step away from the tree, still keeping his distance but making sure she could see him clearly. His face held that familiar smirk, the one that had always preceded his worst moments during their marriage. He knew exactly what he was doing, how his mere presence could unravel her sense of safety. Diana's chest tightened. The park, her sanctuary for the past few years, suddenly felt exposed and dangerous. She set her coffee cup down, her fingers fumbling with the lid. "Max," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Come here, boy." Max trotted over, sensing her distress. She reached for his leash with shaking hands, nearly dropping it twice before managing to clip it on. Her tote bag slipped off the bench as she stood up, spilling her book and phone onto the ground. As she bent to gather her belongings, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. Heavy, deliberate steps she would recognize anywhere. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she straightened up. "Going somewhere so soon, Diana?" James's voice was deceptively soft, but she could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. "And here, I thought we could have a nice chat." Diana clutched Max's leash tighter, grateful for the dog's protective growl. "I have nothing to say to you, James." "Oh, but I think you do." He stepped closer, his cologne, the same brand he'd worn for 30 years, making her nauseous. "You can't keep avoiding me forever. We need to talk about things. About us." "There is no us," Diana managed to say, though her voice shook. "Not anymore." James's face darkened. "You don't get to make that decision," he snarled, his pleasant facade crumbling. "I want you to meet me tomorrow. We have things to discuss, and I'm tired of your little disappearing act." He moved closer, forcing Diana to step back. "You can't hide behind your new friends forever. You can't escape me. We both know that." His words dripped with barely contained rage. "This little independent act of yours, it ends now." Diana clutched Max's leash tighter as James took another step toward her. Her dog growled softly, sensing her distress. The peaceful morning had shattered like fine china on concrete, leaving her with that familiar knot of dread in her stomach. James's face twisted into an ugly scowl. "You think you can just ignore me?" He took another step forward, his movements jerky and aggressive. "After 30 years, you think you can—" A shadow fell across the path. Graham stood there, his leather vest catching the morning sun. He hadn't been there a moment ago, But now he positioned himself between Diana and James, his presence as solid as a brick wall. His voice came out low and steady. "You're done here." James's face flushed red. He clenched his fists, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes as he took in Graham's imposing figure. "This isn't any of your business," he spat, but there was a tremor in his voice that betrayed his bravado. "I'm making it my business." Graham didn't raise his voice or move a muscle, but something in his tone made James take a step back. "Walk away." James's jaw worked back and forth as he glared at Graham. His eyes darted to Diana, then back to Graham. Finally, with a curse under his breath, he backed away, nearly stumbling over his own feet. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat sounded hollow. Diana watched him retreat, her heart still hammering in her chest. Max whined and pressed against her leg, offering comfort in his own way. She felt Graham's gentle touch on her elbow. "Let me walk you home," he said softly. They walked in silence for a while, Max trotting between them. The morning had turned cool, and Diana wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop trembling. "You know," Graham said finally, his voice gentle. "Facing our fears doesn't mean we're not scared anymore. It just means we're stronger than our fear." Diana glanced at him. "I don't feel very strong right now." "But you are." Graham gestured back toward the park. "You didn't run. You stood your ground. That's strength." They reached her apartment building, its red brick facade welcoming in the morning light. Diana paused at the entrance, turning to face Graham. "I used to think being strong meant not being afraid at all." Graham shook his head. "Being strong means feeling the fear and facing it anyway. Every time you stand up to him, even if it's just by living your life, you get stronger." Diana felt something shift inside her, like a seed breaking through soil. It wasn't exactly confidence, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Something that felt like hope, like possibility. "Thank you," she said quietly, meaning more than just the walk home. Graham nodded, understanding in his eyes. He waited until she was safely inside before turning away, his footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. Inside her apartment, Diana leaned against the door, Max settling at her feet. Her hands were still shaking, but beneath the fear, she felt something else. A tiny spark of strength, fragile but growing, like the first green shoot of spring pushing through winter frost. The diner's bell chimed as Diana pushed open the door, scanning the bustling lunch crowd. Graham sat in a corner booth, his leather vest draped over the seat beside him. He stood when he saw her, offering a gentle smile that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Hope you don't mind meeting here," he said as Diana slid into the booth. "They make the best patty melts in town." Diana relaxed into the worn leather seat. "It's perfect. Reminds me of the places I used to go with my dad." The waitress brought them coffee, and Diana wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Over the past few days, these meetings with Graham had become something she looked forward to. Their walks in the park, their talks over coffee. They formed a comfortable routine that helped ease the constant anxiety she'd lived with for so long. "Tell me about your dad," Graham said, stirring sugar into his coffee. Diana smiled, memories flooding back. "He was a mechanic, worked harder than anyone I've ever known. Every Sunday he'd take me for breakfast at a place just like this." She paused, her finger tracing the rim of her mug. "He wouldn't have liked James. He always said I deserved better." Graham nodded, his eyes understanding. "Fathers usually know." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "My own kids, I wasn't there for them like I should have been. Too caught up in the life, you know." "The Hells Angels?" Diana asked softly. "Yeah." Graham's shoulders tensed slightly. "Made a lot of mistakes back then. Trying to make up for them now, helping people where I can." He looked down at his tattooed hands. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years." Diana reached across the table, briefly touching his arm. "You're not that person anymore. I can see that." Their food arrived, and they fell into comfortable conversation. Graham told her about his support group, about the people he'd helped find their way back from dark places. Diana shared stories about her job at the library, about the peace she found in books during her darkest days, "You know what I've noticed?" Graham said, pushing his empty plate aside. "You smile more now. Real smiles, not the kind people wear like masks." Diana felt warmth spread across her cheeks. It was true. She did feel lighter these days. Safer. The weight she'd carried for so long seemed less crushing when shared with someone who understood. "It's easier to smile when you have a friend who understands," she said. "I've never had that before. Someone who just gets it." Graham's eyes softened. Sometimes the best friendships come from the most unexpected places. As they finished their lunch, Diana found herself studying Graham's face, the gentle eyes that contrasted with his tough exterior, the way his whole expression changed when he smiled. She'd never met anyone quite like him, someone who could make her feel so secure just by being there. Walking home later, Diana felt a lightness in her step she hadn't experienced in years. Graham had become more than just a protector. He was a friend who understood her struggles without judgment, who saw her strength when she couldn't see it herself. She couldn't remember the last time she'd connected with someone on such a deep level, and she wondered if perhaps their connection could grow into something more. The morning light filtered through the library windows, casting long shadows across the rows of books. Diana sat at the circulation desk, sorting through returned materials with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved automatically, scanning books and checking for damage while her mind wandered to her lunch with Graham the day before. The quiet routine of her work had always been a comfort, a refuge from the chaos that had defined so much of her life. Today was no different. The soft rustle of pages turning, the gentle tap of computer keys, the whispered conversations of patrons. It felt safe here, among the books and the people who loved them. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, disrupting her peace. Diana glanced at the screen. Blocked number. Her stomach clenched as she stepped into the break room, closing the door behind her. "Hello?" Her voice wavered slightly as she answered. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" James's voice slithered through the phone, cold and familiar. "Running around with that biker trash, pretending you're free of me?" Diana's hand trembled as she gripped the phone tighter. The break room suddenly felt too small, too confined. "Stop calling me James." She tried to sound firm, but her voice cracked. "You belong to me, Diana. Always have. Always will." His words dripped with venom. "Your new friend can't watch you every minute, and when he's not around..." He let the threat hang in the air. Diana ended the call, her breath coming in short gasps. She leaned against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her knees pulled tight to her chest. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she tried to steady her breathing, using the techniques she'd learned in the support group. But James's words echoed in her head. He was right. Graham couldn't be there all the time. The thought of being alone, vulnerable to James's rage, made her chest tighten with fear. After her shift, Diana drove straight to the community center where Graham helped run the support group. She found him in his small office, going through paperwork. He looked up as she entered, his expression immediately concerned when he saw her face. "James called," she said, sinking into the chair across from his desk. Her voice shook as she recounted the conversation, the threats, the fear that had followed her through the rest of her workday. Graham listened quietly, his jaw tightening as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned forward, his tattooed arms resting on the desk between them. "Listen to me, Diana," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "That man is never going to hurt you again, I promise you that." "But you can't be there all the time," Diana whispered, voicing her greatest fear. "He knows that. He's just waiting for the right moment." "Maybe I can't be there every second," Graham acknowledged, "but I will always be there when you need me. And you're stronger than you think. James doesn't own you anymore." Diana nodded, but she felt the weight of James's threats pressing down on her shoulders, crushing the confidence she'd slowly been building. Even here, in this safe space with Graham, she couldn't shake the feeling that James was right, that she'd never truly be free of him. Diana's living room felt smaller than usual as she paced back and forth, her footsteps making soft thuds on the carpet. Every few seconds, she glanced at her phone lying on the coffee table, James's threatening words from earlier still echoing in her mind. Her dog, Max, watched her from his bed in the corner, his head tilted in concern. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered to herself, running her fingers through her graying hair. The setting sun cast long shadows through her curtains, making ordinary objects look menacing. Every passing car made her jump, wondering if it was James coming back. She picked up her phone, opened her contacts, and hovered her thumb over the emergency number. Would they even take her seriously? James hadn't physically hurt her. Not this time. But the fear was real, pressing down on her chest like a heavy weight. Max whined softly, getting up from his bed to press against her legs. Diana reached down to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his warm presence. "I know, boy. I'm scared too." The phone felt heavy in her hand. She thought about all the times during her marriage when she should have called for help but didn't. All those nights she'd convinced herself things weren't bad enough to warrant intervention. All the times she'd believed James when he said no one would believe her anyway. A car door slammed somewhere outside, and Diana flinched. She hurried to the window, peeking through the curtains. Just a neighbor getting home from work. Her heart was racing anyway. "I can't keep living like this," she muttered, resuming her pacing. The walls seemed to be closing in. Every shadow held a threat. Every sound made her skin crawl. Max barked once, making her jump. He was standing by the door, wagging his tail hopefully, reminding her it was time for his evening walk. But the thought of going outside, of being exposed and vulnerable, made her stomach churn. Diana's hands shook as she picked up her phone again. This time, she scrolled to Graham's number. He'd told her to call any time, but would he really want to deal with her problems? She'd already relied on him so much. Another car passed by slowly, and Diana's breath caught in her throat. Without thinking further, she pressed the call button. Graham answered on the second ring. "Diana? Everything okay?" His voice, steady and calm, made tears spring to her eyes. I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling. "James keeps calling. He knows where I work, where I live. I feel like I'm going crazy, jumping at every little noise." "Take a deep breath," Graham said gently. "You're not crazy. What you're feeling is completely normal." Diana sank onto her couch, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "I keep thinking about calling the police, but you're worried they won't take it seriously," Graham finished for her. "Yes," she whispered, "and then he'll be even angrier." There was a moment of silence on the line before Graham spoke again. "Listen, I have a spare room at my place. Why don't you pack a bag and stay with me for a few days, just until you feel safer and can figure out your next steps?" Diana hesitated, relief warring with uncertainty. "I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," Graham said firmly. "You need somewhere safe right now. Somewhere James won't think to look." The afternoon sun warmed Diana's face as she settled onto her favorite blanket in the park. All around her, families and friends gathered on the grass, their excited chatter mixing with the sound of musicians tuning their instruments on the makeshift stage. She smoothed down her flowered sundress, feeling a flutter of pride for choosing to come, despite her fears. "This is exactly what I need," she whispered to herself, watching children chase each other through the crowd. The park had always been her sanctuary, even during the darkest days of her marriage. She wasn't going to let James take that away from her, too. The band started playing, their melody soft and sweet. Diana closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders relaxed, and she felt something close to peace. The singer's voice carried across the park, telling stories of love and hope. A couple nearby swayed to the music, the woman's head resting on her partner's shoulder. Diana smiled, remembering the days when she used to dream of such simple affection. Her weekly talks with Graham had helped her see that she deserved that kind of gentleness. The music shifted to a livelier tune, and people started clapping along. Diana joined in, surprising herself with a small laugh. This was what freedom felt like, being able to enjoy a simple afternoon without looking over her shoulder. But then she saw him. James stood at the edge of the crowd, his face twisted with familiar anger. Even from a distance, she could see the rage in his eyes as he pushed through the crowd toward her. Diana's heart hammered against her ribs, and the music faded to a distant hum. She scrambled to her feet, gathering her blanket with trembling hands. But the crowd had grown thick, leaving no clear path to escape. Families and couples blocked her way, all focused on the performance, unaware of her rising panic. "Did you think you could just come here and pretend everything's normal?" James's voice cut through the music as he reached her. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his face was flushed red with anger. "Acting like you're so innocent, sitting here alone?" "Leave me alone, James," Diana managed to say, but her voice came out weak and shaky. She looked around desperately, hoping someone would notice her distress, but everyone seemed absorbed in the music. James grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "We're going to have a little talk," he growled, yanking her toward the parking lot. Diana stumbled, her legs weak with fear. The familiar feeling of helplessness washed over her, the same paralysis that had kept her trapped in their marriage for so many years. As James dragged her away from the crowd, Diana caught a glimpse of movement through her tears. Graham was pushing through the crowd, his face set with determination, moving straight toward them. His presence, even from a distance, made her heart leap with hope. The music continued to play behind them, a cruel contrast to the scene unfolding at the edge of the crowd. Diana's arm throbbed where James gripped it, but she kept her eyes fixed on Graham's approaching figure, clinging to the promise of safety he represented. Graham moved with surprising speed for his size, placing himself between Diana and James. His tattooed arms were tense but controlled as he faced her ex-husband. The music from the concert faded into background noise, replaced by the sound of Diana's racing heart. "Let her go," Graham said, his voice low and steady. "Right now." James's grip on Diana's arm tightened, making her wince. "This isn't any of your business, old man. This is between me and my wife." "Ex-wife," Graham corrected him. "And you made it my business when you decided to hurt someone in front of me." Diana watched as the two men squared off. Graham's presence was solid and reassuring, like a shield against the storm that was James. She could smell the alcohol on James's breath, see the dangerous glint in his eyes that she remembered all too well from their marriage. "You don't know who you're dealing with," James snarled, his face reddening. "I've got friends who—" "So do I." Graham's interruption was calm but carried an unmistakable weight. "And trust me, you don't want to meet them." The crowd around them had grown quiet, forming a loose circle. Some had their phones out, recording the confrontation. James noticed this, his eyes darting around nervously. "This is the last time I'm going to say it," Graham continued, taking a step closer. "Let her go." James's fingers dug deeper into Diana's arm. She could feel the bruises forming, each second a reminder of the pain she'd endured for so many years. But something was different now. She wasn't alone anymore. "James," Diana found her voice, though it shook slightly. "You need to leave." Her ex-husband's face contorted with rage. He yanked her arm, trying to pull her away, but Graham was faster. In one fluid motion, he broke James's grip on Diana's arm and pushed him back, creating space between them. Diana stumbled backward, rubbing her arm where James's fingers had been. Graham maintained his protective stance, his body language making it clear that James would have to go through him to get to her. "You're done here," Graham said firmly. "Walk away while you still can." James's fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. His face was a mask of fury and humiliation as he looked from Graham to Diana and back again. For a terrible moment, Diana thought he might try to fight. But then James took a step back, then another. "This isn't over," he spat. "You hear me, Diana? This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Graham replied, not moving from his position. James retreated, shooting venomous looks over his shoulder as he pushed through the crowd. Even after he disappeared from view, Diana could feel the weight of his threats hanging in the air. The tension slowly drained from Graham's shoulders as he turned to face her. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. Diana nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Around them, the crowd began to disperse, the concert resuming its cheerful melody. But Diana barely heard it, overwhelmed by a powerful mix of relief and gratitude. In that moment, she realized that for the first time in years, someone had truly stood up for her, had seen her worth, and decided she was worth protecting. Diana's hands trembled as she tried to fit her key into the lock of her apartment door. After 3 attempts, she finally managed to push it open and stumble inside. Her legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. She dropped her purse on the floor and sank into her favorite armchair, the one that faced the window overlooking the street below. The evening sun cast long shadows across her living room floor, but she couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw James's face, contorted with rage, felt the bruising grip of his fingers on her arm. She rubbed the spot absently, knowing it would likely show marks tomorrow. Her dog, Max, padded over and rested his head on her knee, whining softly. Diana scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his warm presence. "We're okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "We're safe now." But were they? James's threats echoed in her mind, each one carrying the weight of years of experience. She knew what he was capable of, knew the lengths he would go to when he felt challenged or humiliated, and today, Graham had definitely humiliated him. Diana got up and double-checked all her locks, front door, back door, windows. It was a familiar routine, one she'd performed countless times during her marriage. The fact that she was doing it again made her angry. 5 years of rebuilding her life, of learning to trust and feel safe, and here she was, right back in that place of fear. She paced her living room, her thoughts spinning in circles. What if James came back? What if he hurt Graham? What if he made good on his threats? The what-ifs piled up until she could barely breathe. Her phone rang, making her jump. Max barked once, startled by her reaction. Diana's heart pounded as she checked the caller ID. When she saw Graham's name, some of the tension left her shoulders. "Hello?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Diana." Graham's deep voice was steady and calm. "Just wanted to check in, make sure you got home okay." She sank back into her chair, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "I did. Thank you. How are you holding up?" The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, made her throat tight. She started to say fine automatically, but stopped herself. "I'm scared," she admitted. "James won't let this go. He never does." "Listen to me," Graham said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not alone in this anymore. James might not let go easily, but neither will I. Neither will the people in our group. You've got a whole community behind you now." Diana wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. "I'm not used to that," she whispered. "Having people on my side?" "Well, get used to it," Graham replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because we're not going anywhere." For the first time since the confrontation in the park, Diana felt the knot in her chest begin to loosen. She looked around her apartment, her safe space, her home, and realized she didn't feel quite so trapped anymore. Graham's words settled over her like a warm blanket, and she found herself believing them. "Thank you, Graham," she said softly, "for everything. You don't have to thank me. Just remember what I said. You're not alone. Not anymore." Diana sat in the law office's waiting room, her fingers fidgeting with the folder of documents in her lap. The leather chairs were comfortable, but she couldn't relax. Photos of James's recent stalking, screenshots of threatening text messages, and police reports from past incidents were all neatly organized inside the manila folder, evidence of years of torment she could no longer ignore. The receptionist's voice was gentle when she called Diana's name. "Ms. Marlowe? Mrs. Thompson will see you now." Taking a deep breath, Diana stood and smoothed her skirt. Graham had offered to come with her today, but she knew this was something she needed to do alone. The click of her sensible shoes echoed down the hallway as she followed the receptionist to the attorney's office. Mrs. Thompson was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. She stood as Diana entered, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Please, have a seat, Ms. Marlowe." Diana settled into the chair across from the large oak desk, clutching her folder like a shield. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before we begin," Mrs. Thompson said, leaning forward slightly, "I want you to know that everything you share in this room is completely confidential. You're safe here." Those words, "you're safe here," made Diana's eyes well up with tears. She blinked, them back quickly, opening her folder with trembling hands. "I need help," she began, stronger this time. "My ex-husband won't leave me alone. He's been following me, threatening me. I'm afraid of what he might do." Mrs. Thompson nodded, taking notes as Diana spoke. She listened intently as Diana detailed James's recent actions, the confrontation in the park, the threatening messages, the stalking at her workplace. When Diana finished, the attorney looked up from her notepad. "Based on what you've told me, we have grounds for both a restraining order and potential criminal charges," Mrs. Thompson explained. "The documentation you've brought is exactly what we need. You've done well to keep records." Relief flooded through Diana's body. She hadn't realized until that moment how worried she'd been that no one would take her seriously. "The restraining order is our first step," Mrs. Thompson continued, pulling out several forms. "It will legally prevent James from coming within 500 feet of you, your home, or your workplace. He won't be allowed to contact you in any way. No calls, no texts, no emails." Diana nodded, absorbing the information. Her hand steadied as she reached for the pen Mrs. Thompson offered. "It's important to understand," the attorney added gently, "that while a restraining order is a powerful legal tool, it's also just a piece of paper. You should continue to be vigilant and maintain your support system." "I understand," Diana replied, thinking of Graham and her support group. "I have people I can count on now." For the next hour, they went through the paperwork together. Mrs. Thompson explained each document carefully, making sure Diana understood her rights and the process ahead. With each signature, Diana felt a little stronger, a little more in control of her own life. When all the forms were completed, Mrs. Thompson gathered them into a neat stack. "We'll file these today," she said. "The temporary order should be in place within 24 hours. Then we'll have a court date for the permanent order in about 2 weeks." Diana stood, gathering her belongings. The folder felt lighter now, as if she'd transferred some of its weight onto shoulders better equipped to bear it. Mrs. Thompson walked her to the door, giving her a business card with her direct number. The elevator ride down was quiet, and as Diana pushed through the building's heavy glass doors, the afternoon sun warmed her face. She took a deep breath of fresh air, feeling it fill her lungs completely for the first time in what felt like years. Diana spread the paperwork across her kitchen table, organizing each document chronologically. Mrs. Thompson had given her a detailed checklist of everything needed for the restraining order. Each piece of evidence felt like a heavy stone in her stomach. Photos of James lurking outside her workplace, screenshots of threatening messages, and detailed accounts of his recent confrontations in the park. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone to type out a quick text to Graham. "Working on the legal papers. Harder than I thought it would be." His response came quickly. "You've got this. Want me to bring over some coffee?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "Please. Black, 2 sugars." 20 minutes later, a gentle knock echoed through her apartment. Diana opened the door to find Graham standing there, 2 steaming cups in his weathered hands. His presence filled her small entryway, but there was nothing threatening about him despite his imposing size. The leather vest he wore bore witness to his former life, but his eyes held nothing but kindness. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing her a cup. Diana accepted it gratefully, breathing in the rich aroma. "I've been staring at these papers for hours. Mrs. Thompson says we have a strong case for a restraining order, but—" She trailed off, leading him to the kitchen. Graham surveyed the organized chaos on her table. "But it's not easy reliving it all?" "Exactly." Diana sank into a chair. "Each incident I document, each threat I write down, it's like being back there again. Being that scared woman who couldn't leave." "But you did leave," Graham reminded her, his voice gentle but firm. "And now you're fighting back. That takes real courage, Diana." She took a sip of coffee, letting his words sink in. "The hearing is next week. Mrs. Thompson says James will probably try to paint himself as the victim, claim I'm exaggerating everything." "That's what men like him do," Graham said, his jaw tightening slightly. "They twist things around, try to make you doubt yourself. But you've got proof, Diana. Real proof." They spent the next hour going through her documentation, Graham helping her organize everything into a clear timeline. His steady presence made the task feel less overwhelming, and Diana found herself sharing details she'd never told anyone before. As Graham was getting ready to leave, Diana's phone pinged with a notification. A letter had been delivered to her email. From James. Her hand shook as she opened it. "You really think anyone will believe you?" James's words crawled across her screen like poison. "You're nothing without me. Always have been, always will be. This little show of independence? It won't last. You'll come crawling back, just like you always did." Diana felt her chest tighten, the familiar tendrils of doubt creeping in. But then she felt Graham's hand on her shoulder, solid and reassuring. "Remember what we talked about in group," he said quietly. "His words only have the power you give them." Diana took a deep breath, looking at the scattered evidence on her table. Proof that she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't exaggerating. Proof that she was stronger than James wanted her to believe. "You're right," she said, closing the email without responding. "I'm not that scared woman anymore." Graham squeezed her shoulder gently. "No, you're not. You're a warrior now, Diana. And warriors don't back down." The courthouse loomed before Diana, its stone steps worn smooth by countless footsteps. Her navy blue blazer felt too tight around her shoulders as she climbed those steps, each one bringing her closer to the moment she dreaded. Graham walked beside her, a steady presence in his pressed black shirt and dark jeans. Inside the courtroom, the polished wooden benches felt hard and unforgiving beneath her. Diana's heart pounded as James strutted in with his lawyer, wearing an expensive suit that seemed designed to make him look respectable. His eyes met hers for a brief moment, and that familiar cold smile spread across his face. "All rise," the bailiff called out. As the hearing began, James's lawyer painted a picture that made Diana's stomach churn. According to him, she was unstable, prone to making up stories. He brought up old medical records showing her anxiety medication prescriptions, twisting them into evidence of her mental instability. "Your Honor," James's lawyer said smoothly, "Mrs. Marlowe has a history of seeking attention through false accusations. My client has only ever shown concern for his ex-wife's well-being." Diana's hands trembled in her lap. She could feel the judge's eyes on her as James took the stand, speaking in that soft, reasonable voice she remembered all too well from their marriage, the one he used right before the worst moments. "I've only tried to check on her," James said, his voice dripping with false concern. "She's been associating with dangerous people." He glanced meaningfully at Graham. "I worry about her judgment." Diana's lawyer objected, but the seed had been planted. She could see doubt flickering across the judge's face. The room felt too warm, too small. James's words wrapped around her like invisible chains, trying to drag her back into that dark place where she'd lived for so many years. Her own testimony came next. Standing at the witness stand, Diana fought to keep her voice steady as she recounted the recent incidents in the park, the threatening messages, the years of abuse. But James's lawyer was relentless, picking apart every detail, suggesting she was confused about dates and times, implying she was imagining things. "Isn't it true," he pressed, "that you've been emotionally unstable since the divorce?" "Objection, Your Honor," her lawyer called out. "Sustained." But Diana could see the damage was done. Doubt hung heavy in the air like smoke. When the judge called for a recess, her legs felt weak as she stood. She made her way to the waiting area outside the courtroom, her vision blurring with unshed tears. Graham found her there, sitting on a hard plastic chair. Without a word, he lowered himself into the seat beside her and took her hand in his. His calloused palm was warm against hers, anchoring her to the present moment. She didn't need to explain the terror and frustration churning inside her. He understood. Diana took a deep breath, squeezing his hand. "I won't let him win," she whispered, more to herself than to Graham. "Not this time." Graham's quiet presence beside her spoke volumes. His steady grip reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore, that she had people in her corner who believed her. The path ahead would be difficult, but she would walk it, step by step, no matter how hard it became. Diana stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on its wooden surface. The courtroom's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, but she kept her chin high. This was her moment to speak her truth. "Your Honor," she began, her voice shakier than she'd hoped. She took a deep breath, remembering Graham's words from earlier. "Just tell your story. That's all you need to do." "For 30 years I lived in fear," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I jumped at sudden noises. I checked the locks 3 times before bed. I wore long sleeves in summer to hide the bruises." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the quiet courtroom. From the corner of her eye, she could see James shifting in his seat, his jaw clenched tight. But for once, his presence didn't make her shrink. Instead, it fueled her determination. "The night I finally left," Diana said, her voice clear and steady now, "James had thrown a glass at my head because dinner was late. It shattered against the wall behind me. I still have a small scar where one of the pieces cut my cheek." She touched her face briefly, remembering. The judge leaned forward slightly, her expression attentive. Diana pulled out her phone, unlocking it with slightly trembling fingers. "I have documented every incident since our divorce 5 years ago. Every threatening text message, every unwanted appearance at my workplace, every violation of the temporary restraining order." She handed the evidence to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. "2 weeks ago, he grabbed me in the park and tried to force me into his car. Last week, he showed up at the concert in the park and did the same thing. I have witnesses to both incidents." Diana gestured toward Graham, who sat in the gallery, his presence giving her strength. "I'm not asking for anything except the right to feel safe," Diana continued. "To walk in the park without looking over my shoulder. To answer my phone without dreading his voice on the other end. To live my life without fear." The judge studied the evidence carefully, scrolling through the documented incidents. The silence in the courtroom felt heavy, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Finally, the judge looked up, her expression grave. "Mr. Marlowe," she addressed James directly, "these allegations are serious and well documented. The evidence shows a clear pattern of harassment and threatening behavior." James started to protest, but his lawyer put a restraining hand on his arm. "Based on the evidence presented," the judge continued, "and considering the documented violations of the temporary order, I am granting Mrs. Marlowe a permanent restraining order. Mr. Marlowe, you are to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Mrs. Marlowe at all times. You are prohibited from contacting her through any means, phone, email, social media, or third parties. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Diana's entire body. She closed her eyes, feeling tears of relief threatening to spill over. 5 years of constant fear, of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at every unexpected sound. And finally, she had legal protection. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, barely hearing the judge's final words about filing procedures. The relief flooding through her system made her legs feel weak, but she stood tall, refusing to let James see her shake. For the first time since leaving him, she felt truly free. The small Italian restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of silverware. Diana sat across from Graham in a cozy corner booth, a half-empty glass of red wine in front of her. The warm glow of the wall sconces cast a gentle light on their table, making the moment feel intimate and safe. "I still can't believe it's over," Diana said, shaking her head with a smile. She picked up her fork, twirling it in her pasta without taking a bite. "When the judge made that ruling," she trailed off, remembering the moment the gavel had come down. Graham's weathered face creased into a gentle smile. "You did that, Diana. Not me, not the lawyers. You found the strength." Diana felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine. The restaurant's soft Italian music played in the background, and the scent of garlic and herbs wafted around them. It felt surreal to be sitting here, celebrating, when just months ago she'd been too afraid to even go out alone. "You know," she said, finally taking a bite of her fettuccine, "I never thought I'd be able to laugh again. Really laugh, I mean." As if to prove her point, she chuckled at a couple at the next table, trying to share a particularly long strand of spaghetti. Graham's deep laugh joined hers, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The sound was warm and genuine, like everything else about him. His leather jacket was draped over the back of his chair, and in his plain black t-shirt, the tattoos on his arms told stories of a different life. Yet here he was, sharing her joy, having stood beside her through everything. "Remember that first support group meeting?" he asked, cutting into his chicken parmesan. "You looked ready to bolt at any second." "I was," Diana admitted, covering her mouth as she laughed. "And now I'm helping lead the sessions. Life is strange that way, isn't it?" They spent the next hour sharing memories of the past few months, but this time the difficult moments didn't sting as much. They were just part of the journey that had led her here. To this peaceful evening with a friend who had become family. As they finished their tiramisu, Diana noticed how different she felt. The constant tension in her shoulders had eased. She no longer scanned every room for exits or flinched when the door opened. She was just present, happy. Outside the restaurant, the evening air was cool and crisp. Street lamps cast pools of golden light on the sidewalk, and a few early stars twinkled above the city buildings. Diana pulled her light jacket closer around her shoulders, not from fear this time, but from the slight chill in the air. "Thank you for dinner," she said, turning to face Graham. "For everything, really." Graham opened his arms, and Diana stepped into his embrace without hesitation. His hug was gentle but secure, like a fortress made of kindness rather than stone. As she stood there, wrapped in the warmth of friendship and triumph, Diana felt the last chains of her past fall away. She was free, not just legally, not just physically, but in her soul. Free to laugh, to live, to be herself without fear. Free to trust, to feel joy, to look forward to tomorrow. As they pulled apart, Diana's smile was as bright as the stars above them. The morning sun streamed through the bare windows of Diana's new apartment, casting long rectangles of light across the hardwood floors. Empty boxes were stacked in neat piles around the living room, each one labeled in her careful handwriting. The space smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Diana stood in the doorway, taking in the sight of her new home. It was smaller than her old place, but it felt bigger somehow, airier, lighter. The walls were a soft cream color she'd picked out herself. Nothing like the dark, oppressive wallpaper James had insisted on in their old house. "Last box coming up," Graham's voice echoed from the stairwell. He appeared moments later, carrying a large cardboard box labeled kitchen. His leather jacket was draped over one of the dining chairs, looking oddly out of place among the moving boxes. "You really didn't have to help," Diana said, though she was grateful. The thought of moving alone had been overwhelming. "What are friends for?" Graham set the box down carefully. "Besides, somebody had to carry that heavy coffee maker of yours." Diana smiled, running her hand along the smooth countertop. The kitchen was modest but modern, with clean lines and plenty of natural light. She'd already decided where everything would go. The coffee maker by the window, her grandmother's old cookie jar on the counter, her favorite mugs in the cabinet above the sink. She began unpacking the kitchen boxes first, carefully unwrapping each plate and glass from its newspaper cocoon. Each item she placed in the cabinets felt like planting a seed of her new life. These weren't the expensive dishes James had insisted on. These were pieces she'd chosen for herself from second-hand stores and local craft fairs. Moving to the living room, Diana unpacked her books, arranging them on the built-in shelves. She came across a photo album and paused, her fingers tracing the spine. Inside were pictures from before James, when she'd been young and confident. She placed it prominently on the shelf, a reminder of who she used to be, and could be again. The afternoon light shifted as she worked, casting different patterns across the floor. She hung curtains in the living room, light, airy ones that let the sunshine filter through. The heavy drapes James had preferred were long gone, donated along with so many other remnants of her old life. In her bedroom, Diana carefully made the bed with new sheets, soft cotton in a cheerful yellow pattern. She'd never been allowed to choose the bedding before. James had insisted on dark colors and heavy fabrics. The brightness of these sheets made her smile every time she looked at them. As she unpacked her clothes into the closet, Diana noticed how different her wardrobe had become. Gone were the conservative, dark pieces James had approved of. In their place hung clothes in various colors and styles, clothes she'd chosen because they made her feel good, not because they met someone else's standards. The last box contained her personal items, photographs, small decorative pieces, and mementos she'd collected over the years. Each one represented a memory or moment that was truly hers. She arranged them thoughtfully around the apartment, creating little corners of joy that caught her eye as she moved from room to room. Standing in the middle of her new living room, Diana looked around at what she'd accomplished. Sunlight danced on the walls, and the space already felt like home. Her home. The furniture was arranged exactly as she wanted it. The decorations reflected her taste, and even the air felt different, cleaner, fresher, full of possibility. A smile spread across her face as she realized that this apartment wasn't just a new place to live. It was a symbol of everything she'd overcome, everything she'd built for herself. For the first time in years, she felt truly proud of where she was and who she'd become. Diana adjusted the chairs in the community center's meeting room, arranging them in a perfect circle. The familiar scent of coffee wafted from the back table where a fresh pot brewed. Her hands moved with practiced ease, smoothing the wrinkles from her blouse as she checked the time. 15 minutes until the support group meeting would begin. 5 years ago, she'd sat in one of these chairs, trembling and uncertain. Now she stood tall as she prepared to lead another session. The room held so many stories, so many tears, and even more moments of breakthrough and healing. People began filtering in, faces both familiar and new. Diana greeted each one with a warm smile, noting how the newcomers carried themselves, shoulders hunched, eyes darting nervously. She recognized that posture all too well. "Welcome, everyone," she said as the circle filled. "I'm Diana, and I'm here to listen and share." Her voice, once timid, now carried confidence and warmth. "Would anyone like to start today?" A young woman named Sarah raised her hand hesitantly. As she began speaking about her struggles with an abusive partner, Diana noticed movement at the back of the room. Graham slipped in quietly, taking a seat near the door. He gave her a small nod, his presence as steady and reassuring as always. Diana listened intently to Sarah's story, offering gentle guidance when needed. "It took me years to understand that leaving wasn't a sign of weakness," she shared. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we need help." Others opened up as the session continued. Diana watched their faces transform as they spoke, the way tension eased from their shoulders, how their voices grew stronger with each word. She remembered her own journey, how speaking her truth had felt like learning to breathe again. "The hardest part," one man said, "is believing we deserve better." "We all deserve better," Diana responded, her gaze sweeping the circle. And recognizing that is the first step toward healing. Throughout the session, she could feel Graham's quiet presence. He'd been there at her lowest point, standing between her and danger without hesitation. Now he watched as she helped others find their own strength, just as he'd helped her find hers. As the meeting drew to a close, people lingered to chat, exchanging phone numbers and words of encouragement. Diana saw hope in their eyes, the same hope she'd discovered in this very room. Graham approached as the last person left. "You're doing good work here," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Diana replied, gathering her notes. "You showed me what real strength looks like." Graham shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Nah, you had that strength all along. I just helped you see it." He gestured around the room. This is all you, Diana. You took your pain and turned it into something beautiful. That's not me. That's all you." Diana felt tears prick at her eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd shed in fear and pain. These were tears of gratitude, of knowing she'd found her purpose in helping others find their way out of the darkness. "Look at them," Graham continued, nodding toward the door where the last of the group members were saying their goodbyes. "They're finding their strength because you showed them it's possible. That's not something I did. That's something you did." Diana watched as the last support group member left the community center, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows, painting the room in warm, golden light. She gathered her notes from today's session, each page filled with stories of struggle and triumph. Her fingers traced over the words she'd written. 5 years ago, she wouldn't have believed this moment possible. Standing here, strong and steady, helping others find their way out of darkness. The memory of that first day in the park, when James had appeared and Graham had stepped in, felt like scenes from another life. Sitting down in one of the empty chairs, Diana closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The fear that had once consumed her, that had made her chest tight and her hands shake, had transformed into something else entirely. Not gone exactly, but different, like a scar that had healed, leaving her stronger at the broken places. A gentle knock at the door made her look up. Graham stood there, his imposing frame softened by the gentle smile on his face. His leather jacket was worn at the edges, and his tattoos peeked out from under his sleeves, but his eyes held that same kindness she'd come to know so well. "That was quite a session," he said, walking into the room. "You really reached that new girl, Sarah. I could see it in her face when you were talking." Diana nodded, gathering her things. "She reminds me of myself back then. So scared, but trying so hard to be brave." "You were always brave," Graham said quietly. "You just needed to remember it." They walked together through the community center, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm. Outside, the evening air was cool and fresh. Without discussion, they headed toward the park where their paths had first crossed. The park looked different in the golden hour, more peaceful, more forgiving. The bench where Diana had once sat, terrified and alone, now felt like a monument to how far she'd come. She wasn't that person anymore, the one who jumped at shadows and apologized for existing. Now she stood tall, met people's eyes, spoke her truth without flinching. They sat together on the bench, watching as people walked their dogs and children played on the swings. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the sweet scent of blooming flowers. Diana felt the solid presence of Graham beside her, steady and reassuring as always. She didn't need to fill the silence with words. That was one of the things she'd learned, that true strength sometimes meant simply being present in a moment, allowing yourself to exist without explanation or apology. Graham understood this too, his quiet support more powerful than any speech could be. The sun painted the clouds in shades of pink and gold, and Diana felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living, truly living, with all the joy and possibility that entailed. The future stretched out before her, not as a threat, but as a promise. A dog ran past, chasing a ball, its owner laughing nearby. Diana smiled, remembering how her own dog used to play here. Everything had changed since those days, and yet this place remained, transformed by new memories, new strength, new hope. She glanced at Graham, who sat contentedly beside her, his presence as steady as ever. No words were needed between them, just the quiet understanding of two people who had faced their demons and emerged stronger, who had found friendship in the midst of struggle, who knew the value of peaceful moments like these. Diana stood backstage at the Wilson Community Center, her heart drumming against her ribs. Through the heavy curtain, she could hear the gentle murmur of voices filling the auditorium. Her hands smoothed down her navy blue blazer for the 10th time, and she took another deep breath. "You've got this," Graham said softly from behind her. He stood there in his usual leather jacket, but today he'd paired it with dark slacks and a crisp white shirt. "Just tell your truth, like you do in group." Diana nodded, clutching her note cards. The small pieces of paper felt warm and damp in her grip. "There are so many people out there," she whispered, "and every single one of them needs to hear what you have to say." The event coordinator, a woman with kind eyes named Sarah, approached with a clipboard. "We're ready for you, Mrs. Marlowe." Diana squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. The familiar weight of fear tried to settle in her stomach, but this time, it felt different. This wasn't the paralyzing terror that had kept her silent for so many years. This was the flutter of anticipation, of knowing she was about to do something important. The stage lights were bright, making the audience fade into shadow. Diana approached the podium, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. The microphone picked up the sound of her breathing as she arranged her note cards. "Good evening," she began, her voice stronger than she expected. "My name is Diana Marlowe, and 5 years ago, I was trapped in an abusive marriage that I thought would kill me." The audience grew still. In the front row, she could make out some familiar faces from her support group. They nodded encouragingly. "For 30 years, I lived in fear. I jumped at shadows. I made myself small. I believed the lies I was told about my worth." Diana paused, letting her gaze sweep across the crowd. "But I'm not here to talk about the darkness. I'm here to talk about finding light." As she spoke, memories flickered through her mind. That day in the park when Graham had stood up for her, the first support group meeting where she'd barely whispered her name, the courthouse where she'd finally won her freedom. Each memory no longer carried the sting it once had. "We all have the strength to change our stories," she continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that strength, someone to stand beside us while we remember who we truly are." The words flowed easier now, and Diana found herself setting aside her note cards. She told them about rebuilding her life, piece by piece, about learning to trust again, to laugh again, to live without constantly looking over her shoulder. "Freedom isn't just about escaping," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about waking up one morning and realizing that the person who hurt you no longer has power over your thoughts, your dreams, or your future." As she spoke these words, something shifted inside her. The last remnants of James's influence crumbled away, like old chains turning to dust. She was no longer speaking to prove anything to anyone. She was speaking because she had something valuable to share, because her voice mattered. The audience leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word. In the back of the room, Graham stood with his arms crossed, a proud smile on his face. Diana's voice grew stronger, filling the auditorium with hope and determination. "Today I stand before you not as a victim, but as someone who chose to rewrite her own ending. And if I can do it, so can you." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers washing over her like a warm wave. Diana stood tall at the podium, finally free of the shadows that had haunted her for so long. In this moment, sharing her truth with hundreds of strangers, she felt more herself than she had in decades. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.